Here's what's coming up on Network Africa. British Home Secretary James Cleverly visits Rwanda to sign a new asylum treaty. Burkina Faso and Niger join Mali to quit the anti-jihadist G5 Sahel security force. Plus, commemorating the legacy of South Africa's leader Nelson Mandela 10 years after his passing. Hello and welcome to the program today. I'm Layo Olarinde. We begin in Rwanda, where the British Home Secretary James Cleverly is in the country to sign a new treaty to send asylum seekers to the African nation. And that's coming after the UK's top court declared the deportation scheme unlawful. Well, the Rwanda plan is at the center of the government's strategy to cut migration and is being watched closely by other countries considering similar policies. But the United Kingdom's Supreme Court last month ruled that such a move would violate international human rights laws enshrined in domestic legislation. Well, since that ruling, Britain has been seeking to renegotiate this agreement with Rwanda to include a binding treaty that it would not expel asylum seekers sent there by Britain. It's one of the court's major concerns. Meanwhile, as the UK seeks to cut the number of migrants arriving in Britain through legal routes, James Cleverly on Monday announced stricter and tougher measures to reduce migration. The Home Secretary promises that a 5-point plan would deliver the biggest ever cut in net migration after levels soared to a record high in the UK. Well, these new measures could impact several Africans who are seeking to live and work in Britain. According to UK's Office for National Statistics, a total of 141,000 Nigerians migrated to the UK between June 2022 and the year ending June 2023. Well, in the year ending June 2023, the top 5 non-EU nationalities for immigration flows into the UK were India, Nigeria, China, Pakistan, and Ukraine.
To this country is far too high and needs to come down. And today we are taking more robust action than any other government before in order to bring this down. In total, this package, plus our reduction in student dependence, will mean around 300,000 fewer people will come in future years than have come to the UK last year. We will stop immigration undercutting the salary of British workers. We will increase the skilled worker earnings threshold by a third to 38,700 from next spring, in line with the median full-term wage for those kinds of jobs. Those coming on health and social care visa routes will be exempt, so we can continue to bring in the healthcare workers on which our care sector and NHS rely.
Well, joining us now is Urayeneza Bernard, a socio-political commentator and a retired civil servant from Kigali. Hello, Bernard. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you. Hello.
Now, what do you make of the new asylum treaty that we're expecting British Home Secretary to sign with Rwanda's foreign ministry?
This treaty, as you know, is intended to bypass the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, and rightly so, because the Supreme Court legislated on administrative matters that touch basically on the relations between two countries that should be the preserve of the governments of the day. So it is right, and we hope it will be able to go around the roadblocks that were set up by the Supreme Court. But on the other hand, this immigration deal is something that's coming to solve very intractable issues on immigration that not only concern the United Kingdom, but various other countries that we will call the first world. So we have the same issues right across the board: continental Europe and the United States, Israel, some Arab countries. So what this deal is coming to do is to create a scenario where some of these issues can be solved between well-established developing countries that can handle what are their own people, and these first world countries where these people go sometimes and get stuck.
Well,
So,
speaking of,
Yes,
developing
please.
countries being able to handle this, like you've rightly mentioned, this plan has been in the works, and British top government, it got struck out by the court. But talk to us about the reason behind Rwanda, agreeing to receive these asylum seekers, and really how prepared is the country in doing this?
Rwanda is very well prepared. Rwanda is a country that is a net importer of people with problems, Africans, Asians, and others. So, for example, we already have Afghanis here. We have Sudanese, we have Congolese, we have Burundians in thousands. And they are well treated. Their cases in terms of infrastructure to receive them, in terms of how they're handled when they are here, their rights. In fact, Rwanda is one of the most progressive countries when it comes to immigrants, because they're allowed to interact, to live freely, to work, to do business. So it's a very positive environment for immigrants. But beside that, it's not that they are being sent here to get stuck here. No, they are being sent here as a pathway to proper immigration. When it comes to some of the logistics and everything, yeah, that is where the countries that were originally the objective of these immigrants come in. So they sometimes have the budget, but they don't have the will, and they sometimes don't even have the right ideological mindset to treat these immigrants well. So it's sad to see people, first of all, getting stuck along the way. And then secondly, when they get there, they get stuck and mired in a non-changing status for many years, sometimes up to 10, 15, 20 years. Really,
Indeed.
It's both the comfort in terms of the ability to take care of them, but also as a stopgap measure for those who really want to insist and eventually end up in the West.
All right. So even as we're waiting for the plan, and we're waiting to see the signing between both foreign ministers and the Home Secretary, the UK Home Secretary, and the Rwandan Foreign Minister. Even as we await that signing, let's talk about how ordinary Rwandans are, reacting to this plan. What is the mood in the country, and how are people, willing to accept new migrants in their country?
Well, there are two sides to this. First of all, culturally, Rwandans are a welcoming people. And that's why I gave you the history of Rwanda in the recent past, being a net recipient of immigrants. Previously, Rwandans lived abroad, were forced to flee their own country. And so they understand how it is that people end up in other countries. So they are welcoming. But the second bit of it is that there is a bit of skepticism about how people are going to come and sometimes maybe live better than the locals. because there is quite a bit of money being spoken about in terms of sharing it with Rwanda to look after these people. And the way people view it is that some of these immigrants will come and will definitely be a notch better off than Rwandans. So this may create a bit of conflict, and we don't know where this would lead. But hopefully,
yes,
as they integrate better, they will be able to understand the local situation and live in ways that do not make them clash.
All right, then we'll just have to wait and see. But we like to thank you, Urayeneza Bernard, socio-political commentator in Kigali. Thanks for your time on the program.
Pleasure. Thank you too.
Away from Rwanda, Burkina Faso and Niger have followed Mali in announcing that they are withdrawing from an international force known as the G5 that was set up to fight Islamists in the Sahel region. Well, all three countries are run by military rulers following coups who have they've now formed their own mutual defense pact that's called the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, and they signed that pact in September. However, Chad and Mauritania are still part of the G5 Sahel force, which is meant to be made up of about 5,000 soldiers. A statement from the military-led governments of Burkina Faso and Niger was critical of the G5 force for failing to make the Sahel region safer. It also suggested that the anti-jihadist force undermined the two African nations' desire for greater independence and dignity. Guinea-Bissau's President Umaro Sissoco Embalo has dissolved the opposition-dominated parliament 3 days after armed clashes that he describes as an attempted coup. Well, according to a presidential decree that was announced, the date of the next legislative elections will be set in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. The decree further stated that President Embalo invokes the complicity between the National Guard as the body involved in the clashes with the Presidential Guard and certain political interests within the state. Well, Guinea-Bissau is currently experiencing political instability and has experienced a string of coups since its independence from Portugal in 1974. Well, today marks 10 years since the passing of South Africa's first democratically elected president and anti-apartheid struggle hero, Nelson Mandela. He is known throughout the world as a towering statesman who led his country through bloodshed and turmoil to democracy. Well, the former South African president actively protested apartheid for most of his life, and he is known for being one of the world's most famous political prisoners. His anti-apartheid activism never faltered. He delivered speeches, wrote letters while imprisoned, and after his release, negotiated with the South African government officials to end apartheid in the 1990s. Well, the Nobel Peace Prize winner died on December 5th, 2013 at the age of 95 after a long illness. Well, let's now listen to the late leader 2 days after he was released from prison, speaking to his supporters in Soweto in February 1990, and also when he cast his vote in Durban in the first general election after apartheid in April 1994.
We are going forward. The march towards freedom and justice is irreversible. I have spoken about freedom in my lifetime. Your struggle, your commitment, and your discipline has released me to stand before you today. I have fought very firmly against white domination. I have fought very firmly against black domination. I cherish the ideal of a new South Africa where all South Africans are equal.
Still to come on the program. A young Ugandan activist, Vanessa Nakate, calls for billions and not millions more needed to address the global climate crisis. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the program. Onuakot Court has sentenced former Mauritanian President Mohamed Abdelaziz to 5 years imprisonment for abuse of power to amass a fortune. Mr. Aziz had been on trial since January, along with 10 other people, including 2 former prime ministers, former ministers, and businessmen, on charges of illicit enrichment, abuse of office, influence peddling, and money laundering. Well, after several days of deliberation behind closed doors, the court has now found against him only illicit enrichment and money laundering. The court has ordered the confiscation of assets acquired through actions falling under these qualifications and has also disqualified Mr. Aziz from exercising his civil rights. The 66-year-old becomes one of the few former heads of state in Africa to be convicted while in power. Well, Tanzania says the death toll from floods in the northern region following torrential rains this weekend has risen to 63. This adds to hundreds of other deaths caused by extreme weather in East Africa since seasonal rains began in October. Well, the number of injured people stands at 116. President Samia Suluhu Hassan had to shorten her trip to the COP28 climate talks in the UAE to oversee the response to the incident. Well, severe flooding has forced hundreds of thousands of people from their homes in Kenya, Somalia, Ethiopia, and Tanzania. Well, the flooding comes on the back of the worst drought to hit the region in 40 years. Back here in Nigeria, President Bola Tinubu has condoled with the families and the government of Kaduna State after dozens of civilians were killed by a military airstrike. Well, he describes the incident as unfortunate, disturbing and painful, expressing grief over the tragic loss of Nigerian lives. In a statement, the president has directed a thorough and full-fledged investigation into the incident by relevant authorities while calling for calm. Well, Governor Uba Sani of the Northwest State has also ordered a probe into the incident while explaining that his administration is determined to prevent a reoccurrence. Well, the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, confirms that 85 civilians were killed and 66 others injured.
What was supposed to be a festive Sunday turned into doomsday for residents of Tundumbiri community who were marking the Eid Maulud, an event by Muslims to commemorate the birth of Prophet Muhammad. During a routine mission against terrorists in the area by the Nigerian army, an unmanned aerial vehicle mistakenly bombed the locals who gathered in a particular location. But what went wrong during the operation?
Abin da shi mai unguwan yankin yake gaya mana yau da safe estimate din kusan mutum sama da 85 sun mutu, kuma akalla mun ɗigo mutum 66 yanzu da haka mun kawo su nan asibiti domin Samuel Arwan sun magana da kansilan mu na wannan yankin ya ce maza mu kwaso su duka mutanen a zo a kawo su asibiti. To yanzu muna nan barar duka da su kuma suna samun kulawa Allah da kamar yadda kuka ga zuwa gani yanzu.
Search and rescue efforts are still ongoing. We will communicate to members of the press further development as we receive. We are sad by this unfortunate incident, and Kaduna State government, under the leadership of Senator Obasani, has condoled members of the entire community. Similarly, government had an interaction or a closed-door meeting with critical stakeholders and other religious leaders, where issues regarding what happened were discussed in detail.
The National Emergency Management Agency puts the fatality figure at 85, while 66 others sustained varying degrees of injuries and are presently being treated at the Barao Diko Teaching Hospital in the Kaduna State capital.
We are still assessing them. Some are already in the theater. We are going to assess the extent of injuries, right? Some have very blunt abdominal injuries. Some have lacerating abdominal injuries with so much massive bleeding. Some have some very bad fractures, right? Some have certain other injuries that we are going to assess. Some have been taken to the theater.
Following the incident, the Kaduna State government summoned an emergency security meeting on Monday, which was attended by heads of security agencies, traditional and religious leaders, as well as representatives of Tundumbiri community. Now, Ubasani has expressed sadness over the unfortunate incident and has therefore ordered a thorough investigation into the bombing of civilians in a state that has been fatigued by lingering insecurity over the past 7 years. Although the army has explained that terrorists often deliberately embed themselves within civilian population centers in order for civilian population to bear the consequences of their atrocities. What's clear, however, is that this is not the first time innocent civilians have been killed in accidental bombings by the military.
It has been happening, really, in some states. So that it shouldn't be repeated from state to state. If not, people will have a different interpretation in the whole issue. So there is need for the government, more especially security agents, those around. Such operations should be thoroughly done before it happens.
So far, the remains of the victims have been laid to rest in accordance with their religious beliefs, while search and rescue operations are still ongoing in Tundumbiri community to ascertain the actual number of casualties and the level of devastation from the airstrike.
And as we end the program today, for the funds needed in tackling the global climate crisis, Ugandan climate activist Vanessa Nakate says that billions of dollars, not millions, is needed to address the ongoing situation. Ms. Nakate was speaking at the COP28, and she said she believes the finance has to serve the interests of the people and the people that are on the front lines of the climate crisis.
I know that some pledges have been made in regards to the loss and damage fund, but many of these pledges have been coming in millions. However, the costs of loss and damage are in billions. The people that are on the front lines of the climate crisis, they need billions to address the worst impacts of this crisis and not millions. And when I say that finance has to serve the interests of the people, it is because climate change is more than weather. It's more than statistics. It's really about the people. And that is why we must have a human face in the conversation about the climate crisis. But then there is also worries about the fossil fuel influence over the COP process. And I think for me, that is my biggest worry. Well, adaptation is important. Loss and damage is important as well. But if I saw that you are in a burning house, the first thing I would do would be to try to get you out of that burning house and not another house, because maybe by the time I build you that other house, you've lost your life in the house that is on fire. And that is what I'm seeing here, that we are not addressing the root cause of the climate crisis. Fossil fuels account for 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and yet we are not addressing the elephant in the room. Simply put, they are the problem. The latest IPCC reports say that we must halve emissions by 2030 to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. How will that be possible if we are ignoring the elephant in the room? Only interesting conversations have been on the loss and damage fund operationalization. However, there is a worry that this could have been a distraction for the real agenda that is in this place.
And that's it on the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.